Have you ever wanted a place where you can learn, relax, and be entertained all at once? Well, you've just found it. Welcome to my channel, where every video is created with passion and creativity. Stick around, hit subscribe, and let's explore something amazing together.
The moment I turned my key in the lock that rainy Tuesday afternoon, 3 days earlier than my wife expected me home, I heard her voice drift from the dining room saying the words that would unravel 22 years of my life in a single breath. Don't worry about Nathan. By the time he figures it out, the money will be gone and the papers will already be filed. He never comes home early. I froze in the foyer with my duffel bag still on my shoulder, rainwater dripping from my jacket onto the hardwood floor, and I listened to two men respond in the calm, professional voices of people who build by the hour. But to understand how I ended up standing there, betrayed in my own house by the woman I had loved since I was 23 years old, you have to let me take you back 8 months, to the night my son told me something that broke my heart before I even knew it needed breaking. My name is Nathan Brooks. I'm 48 years old, a retired Navy SEAL turned senior security consultant for a private firm out of Denver. And for most of my adult life, I believed I had built something that couldn't fall apart. I met my wife, Vanessa, during my second year of college at Colorado State. She was studying communications. I was studying anything that would keep me out of my father's failing auto shop, and within 6 months of meeting her, I had enlisted and asked her to marry me. She said yes on the hood of my old Ford Bronco in the parking lot of a diner in Fort Collins. We were married before I shipped out, and for the first decade of our lives together, we were the couple our friends pointed to and said, "Those two will make it." Our son, Ethan, was born when I was 26 on a base hospital in Virginia, and from the minute that boy wrapped his tiny hand around my finger, I knew my whole reason for waking up in the morning had changed. For a long time, we were happy, real happy. The kind of happy people don't appreciate until it's gone. But somewhere in the years between my last deployment and Ethan leaving for Stanford at 18, my wife became a stranger living in my house. I don't know exactly when it started. I know she got promoted to vice president of communications at her pharmaceutical firm the same year I transitioned out of active duty, and the promotions kept coming after that. I know she started staying later at the office, coming home with a glass of wine already in her hand from the drive, and rolling away from me in bed if I so much as brushed her shoulder. I know she stopped laughing at my jokes. I know she started looking at me across the dinner table like I was a piece of old furniture she was trying to decide whether to reupholster or drag to the curb. Last Thanksgiving, my son came home for 4 days, and on his second night he asked if we could go for a walk. Just the two of us. It was snowing lightly, the kind of fat, slow snow that feels almost warm, and we walked along the greenway behind our neighborhood with our hands jammed in our coat pockets. He was quiet for most of it. Then he said, "Dad, are you happy?" I tried to laugh the question off, but he stopped walking and looked at me under a streetlight and said, "Because you don't look happy. Mom doesn't look happy either, and I don't want to keep pretending it's fine when it's not. You've given me everything. You deserve to be happy too, even if that means not being married to her anymore." I don't think I said much in response. I remember hugging him and feeling my throat close up so tight I couldn't breathe. I remember him driving back to campus the next morning and me standing in the driveway watching his taillights until they disappeared. And I remember walking back inside, where my wife was sitting on the couch scrolling her phone without looking up, and realizing I was completely alone in a house I had paid for twice over. For the next few months, I tried. God knows I tried. I came home with flowers she put in a vase without smelling. I cooked her favorite dinner, ossobuco with the saffron risotto she used to request on her birthday, and she ate it in silence while watching a British baking show on her iPad. I asked her on dates. She had a work thing, always a work thing. When I tried to initiate anything in bed, she would flinch away like I was a stranger on a subway who had leaned in too close. One night, after she had rolled away from me for the 4th time in 2 weeks, I lay there in the dark staring at the ceiling fan and said softly, "Vanessa, what happened to us?" She didn't answer. I thought she was asleep. An hour later, I got up to get a glass of water, and when I came back, she was lying exactly the same way, eyes open, staring at the wall. She never said a word. I started to wonder if she was having an affair. I watched her for signs, the way any husband does when he starts to suspect. A new perfume. A laugh on a phone call she took in the garage. A name that came up too often in casual conversation and then disappeared. I didn't find anything concrete, but a man who spent 20 years reading threats for a living develops a gut, and my gut was screaming. The problem was I didn't trust my gut anymore because my gut had told me for the last 3 years that everything was going to be fine, and it wasn't. My best friend, Marcus Reed, had been my swim buddy on my second SEAL team deployment. After he got out, he went to law school on the GII. Bill, and by 40, he had one of the most respected family law practices in Denver. We met for steak once a month at a place downtown where the waitresses still call you sir and the bourbon list is longer than the menu. Over ribeyes in early March, after I had nursed my second whiskey longer than I should have, he set his glass down and said, "Nate, you look like hell. Talk to me." So I did. I told him everything. The distance, the cold side of the bed, Ethan's walk in the snow, the gut feeling, the way my wife had started taking phone calls in rooms with the door closed, the way, one night a month earlier, I had noticed a withdrawal from our joint savings account of $18,000 that she had marked home improvements. And when I asked her about it, she had said with a kind of practiced annoyance, "Nathan, I don't audit your expenses. Please don't audit mine." Marcus listened without interrupting. When I finished, he pushed his plate aside and leaned forward on his elbows and said, "Brother, I'm going to tell you what I tell every client who walks into my office in a panic. You need to stop guessing. You need to know. And there's a very specific way we find out." He gave me the name of an investigator. Not a cheap one, not a guy in a raincoat with a camera, but a former federal agent named Dale Whitaker who specialized in what Marcus called high-asset domestic surveillance. Marcus said it like he was naming a dentist. I told him I didn't want to be that guy, the husband who spies on his wife. Marcus just looked at me and said, "Nathan, if she's clean, you'll know, and you can fix it. If she's not, you need to know before she does something you can't come back from. You've been lied to enough. Stop paying for it with your peace of mind." I hired Dale the following Monday. The first 4 weeks were the longest weeks of my life. Dale called me every Friday with his updates. She went to work. She went to lunch with a coworker named Priscilla. She went to yoga on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She picked up dry cleaning. She met a woman for coffee on Saturday and they talked about real estate in Scottsdale. She came home. She went to bed. Nothing, no hotels, no men, no strange addresses. By the fourth Friday, I was almost relieved. I was starting to convince myself that maybe my gut had been wrong, that maybe what I had was a marriage in trouble, but not a marriage being actively destroyed, and that maybe I could still save it if I tried harder. Then, the 6th week, Dale called me on a Wednesday afternoon from my own neighborhood. "Nathan," he said, and his voice had a different tone in it, a tone I hadn't heard from him before. "I'm parked 2 blocks from your house. I've been watching a gentleman named Douglas Fairweather enter your home 3 times in the last 8 days, each time when you were out of town. Mr. Fairweather is a partner at Fairweather Lee and Associates. They do high net worth divorce. I'm going to send you some photographs tonight. I'd like you to sit down somewhere private when you open them." I pulled my truck over onto the shoulder of I-70 and put my hazard lights on and stared at the mountains for a long time before I said anything. Finally asked him, "Is there another man?" He paused. Then he said, "Nathan, I don't think this is about another man. I think this is about money." That night, the photographs came through. They were taken through my own dining room window. My wife was sitting at my dining room table, the one I had refinished by hand 3 summers ago, pouring red wine for 2 men in suits. Laptops open, papers spread out. A woman I had never seen before at the other end of the table, taking notes. Dale's report named her as a forensic accountant. The next photograph was of my wife, laughing, actually laughing, in a way I hadn't seen her laugh in 3 years. Her head thrown back, her hand on the lawyer's forearm, celebrating something. I sat on the edge of my bed at the Marriott in Salt Lake City where I was working a contract, and I stared at those pictures until the screen of my phone timed out, and then I turned it back on and stared at them again. The next morning, I called Marcus from the parking lot of the hotel. I told him everything Dale had sent. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "Nathan, listen to me carefully. I need you to do exactly what I tell you to do, and I need you to not confront her. Not yet. If she's working with Fairweather, she's been planning this for longer than you think. We need to know what's already moved. Can you trust me?" I said yes. For the next week, I went about my life like nothing had changed. I came home at my normal time. I kissed the top of her head when she didn't look up from her phone. I asked about her day and got the same half-syllable answers I'd been getting for a year. And in the meantime, Marcus and his forensic team were working through our finances with a comb so fine it could find a crumb in a carpet. What they found broke something in me that I didn't know could still break. Over the previous 18 months, my wife had moved roughly $420,000 out of our joint holdings into accounts I had never heard of. a rental property in Scottsdale that I didn't know existed, a private investment fund registered under her maiden name, a six-figure consulting fee paid from her firm to an LLC whose sole member was her sister. She had also, 6 months earlier, taken out a home equity line of credit against our house, the one we had paid off together, for $250,000. She had forged my signature on the paperwork. Marcus showed me a scan of it, and I recognized my own handwriting almost, but not quite. She had practiced. She had actually sat down somewhere and practiced my signature. The coffee meeting about real estate in Scottsdale. Dale had noted it in the third weekly report. Her friend, the casual conversation. That was Vanessa buying a house to move into after she took everything from me. Nathan, Marcus said to me in his office on a Friday afternoon, with the financial report spread across his desk like a murder scene. This isn't a divorce, this is a heist, and the only reason she's been colder to you in the last year is because she's trying to provoke you. If you lose your temper, if you shove her, if you break something, if you yell where a neighbor hears, she has a domestic violence claim that freezes you out of your own home and doubles her leverage. She's not avoiding you, she's baiting you, and she's almost ready to pull the trigger. Fairweather doesn't sit at a client's dining room table unless the papers are about to be served. I sat in Marcus's office for a long time without saying anything. I thought about Ethan's face in the snow. I thought about my wife at 23, standing in the rain outside our first apartment, laughing because the power had gone out on our anniversary and we were eating takeout Chinese by candlelight. I thought about how a person you've loved that long can, while you're not looking, become a person capable of forging your name on $250,000 in debt. Finally, I said, "What do we do?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. We beat her to the courthouse. Which brings me back to that rainy Tuesday. I was supposed to be in Phoenix until Friday. My contract had wrapped 2 days early. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell anyone except Marcus. I drove through the mountains in a rainstorm that had the wipers running full speed the whole way home, and I parked 2 streets over and walked the rest of the way through the wet grass. Marcus had coached me. Don't shout, don't touch her, don't break anything. Whatever happens, film it on the body cam clipped under my jacket, the one he'd given me the week before. We need her words, Nathan. Her own words. Nothing else matters. I turned my key in the lock, and I heard her voice from the dining room say the thing about the money being gone and me never coming home early. I took 3 slow breaths, the way my swim instructor had taught me back in BUDS, ACE, a lifetime ago. Then I walked into my own dining room. There were 4 people around my table. My wife in the chair at the far end, her hair pinned up, a glass of wine in her hand. Douglas Fairweather on her right, silver-haired and unbothered. The forensic accountant, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses, pushed up on her head. And, stranger than anyone, my wife's sister Marlena, whom I hadn't seen in 2 years and who stopped laughing mid-sentence when she saw my face. My wife's smile died first. Then the color drained from it. Then she set down her wine glass slowly and said, "Nathan, you're home early." I looked at her. I looked at each of them in turn. Then I walked to the head of the table, my table, and I sat down in my chair. I sat down in my chair. I said. I heard you. I heard all of it. Don't worry about Nathan. By the time he figures it out, the money will be gone. I want you to know I've been recording this conversation for the last 90 seconds, and I also want you to know that my attorney, Marcus Reed, filed a motion for an emergency asset freeze with the Denver County Court about 2 hours ago. The account's in Scottsdale, Vanessa. The LLC under Marlena's name. The HELOC you forged my signature on in September. All of it is frozen as of 4 p.m. this afternoon. Douglas Fairweather, to his credit, did not change his expression, but his hand slid off the table and into his pocket. My wife said, "Nathan, you don't understand what you're hearing." "I understand exactly what I'm hearing," I said. "I've had a forensic team on our accounts for 2 weeks. I know about the rental property. I know about the Sisters LLC. I know about the signature you forged. I know you've been cold to me for 18 months on purpose, trying to push me into losing my temper so you could tell a judge I was a danger to you. I know you had 3 meetings with Mr. Fairweather in my house in the last 8 days. I have photographs. I have bank records. I have the original loan application with the forged signature and a handwriting analyst's report. And I have, as of this moment, the audio of you telling 3 people in my house that you intend to steal from me." I looked at her across the length of the table I had sanded and stained with my own hands. "You wanted a divorce, Vanessa. All you had to do was ask." I stood up. You have 20 minutes to leave my house. All of you. If any of you are still here in 21, I'm calling the police and I'm going to tell them exactly what I just recorded. Mr. 4. Fairweather, I'm sure you understand why that would be inconvenient for your career. Fairweather stood up without a word. He closed his laptop. He gathered his papers. He nodded at my wife once, a nod that said, in the way lawyers communicate, "We will talk about this later, and it is very bad." Then he walked out. The forensic accountant followed him. Marlena followed them, not looking at me. My wife stayed in her chair. She stared at her hands for a long time. Then she looked up and said, "You were supposed to just let this happen." I didn't answer. There was nothing to answer. "I never meant for it to be like this," she said. "I just wanted out. I stopped loving you a long time ago, Nathan. I just wanted out with enough to start over." "You could have walked out the front door with a suitcase and your half of everything," I said. "I would have signed it. I would have cried, but I would have signed it. Instead, you tried to burn me down on the way out. Get out of my house." She got out of my house. The divorce itself was brutal, but brutal in the way a surgery is brutal, which is to say it hurt and it healed. With the forged HELOC, the asset transfers, and Vanessa's own recorded words, the judge was not kind to her. I was awarded the house free and clear, a disproportionate share of the liquid assets to compensate for the fraud, and a judgment that, if she failed to pay, would follow her into Scottsdale and wherever she went after that. Fairweather, it turned out, had another case in front of the same judge 3 months later, and from what Marcus heard around the courthouse, his practice quietly shrank after that season. My wife's sister lost her job. Marlena's husband filed for his own divorce shortly after. The LLC dissolved. The entire scheme, dragged into the light, fell apart under its own weight. Ephraim called me the night the papers were finalized. He didn't say much. He just said, "Dad, I'm proud of you." And then he cried for the first time since he was a kid. And I cried with him for 2,000 miles of phone line. And when we hung up, I sat on the porch of my house in the dark with my dog and a glass of bourbon, and I felt, for the first time in years, like a man who was done apologizing for being alive. I didn't stay in the house long. Too many ghosts and too many rooms. I rented it out to a young family, kept the title in my name, and I moved full-time to my cabin up near Estes Park, a place I'd bought 15 years earlier as a retirement someday and had barely used. 2 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, a porch that looked down on a creek where elk came to drink at dawn. I spent the first month up there just fixing things. Rebuilt the back deck, replaced the water heater, reset every fence post along the property line. My hands needed work the way some men need prayer. In July, about 4 months after the divorce was final, my dog Murphy, a yellow lab I had rescued when he was a puppy with a busted hip, started favoring that hip again. The nearest veterinarian was in a little town called Allenspark, about 20 minutes down the mountain, and the only vet in town was a woman named Dr. Claire Donovan. The first time I met her, she was crouched on the floor of her examination room in jeans and a plaid shirt, scratching Murphy behind the ears and telling him in a low, serious voice that he was the most handsome boy she had seen all week. Murphy, a dog who usually hated strangers, was wagging his tail so hard his whole back end was swinging. Claire was 38, I learned over the course of several visits. A widow. Her husband had been a wildland firefighter, killed in a burnover 3 years earlier. She had a son, Lucas, who was 7, quiet, obsessed with dinosaurs, and who came with her to the clinic sometimes after school and sat at the front desk coloring while his mother worked. The first time I met Lucas, he looked up from a picture of a triceratops and asked me, with the grave seriousness only a 7-year-old can muster, "Are you a soldier?" I told him I used to be. He nodded like this confirmed something important, and then he went back to his coloring. I didn't mean to fall in love with Claire Donovan. I had honestly sworn off the whole category. But one Saturday in August, Murphy needed a checkup, and the checkup ran long, and she mentioned offhand that she had been meaning to try the barbecue place 2 doors down but didn't like eating alone. I heard myself say I didn't either. We had ribs and iced tea and talked for 3 hours about everything and nothing. She asked me about the Navy. I asked her about her husband. She cried a little, and then she laughed through the crying, and she said, "I'm sorry. I haven't talked about him with anyone in a long time." I told her she didn't need to apologize for that. Not to me. On the way home that night, I stopped on the dirt road halfway up the mountain and turned off the engine and sat there in the dark, with the windows down listening to the creek, and I realized my chest didn't hurt for the first time in 2 years. Claire and I took it slow. For months we were just friends, then friends who hiked on Sundays, then friends who made dinner together. Lucas came up to the cabin one weekend and caught his first fish off my dock, a little rainbow trout that he insisted we release because, he said, Mom says little guys should get to grow up. Ethan came home that Christmas and met Claire for the first time. He pulled me aside in the kitchen, wiped his hands on a dish towel and said, Dad, she looks at you like Mom used to. A long time ago when I was little. I'd forgotten what that looked like until now. Claire and I married the following spring, in a small ceremony on the deck of the cabin with Lucas as the ring bearer and Ethan as my best man. Claire wore a simple white dress and wildflowers in her hair. She walked up the wooden steps of my porch, took my hands and said her vows to tears that were, for the first time in her life, or mine, the good kind. A year later, we had a daughter. We named her Rose, after Claire's grandmother. She is 3 years old now, and every morning she climbs into our bed at 6 a.m. and shoves her cold feet against my back and demands pancakes. Lucas, now 11, calls me Dad most of the time. Sometimes he calls me Nathan. I told him both are right. He taught Rose her first full sentence, which was, Lucas is my brother. He beamed for a week. I saw my ex-wife once more, about 2 years after the divorce. I was at a hardware store in Boulder, buying stain for a dresser Claire and I were refinishing for Rose's bedroom. Vanessa was in the paint aisle, and she looked thinner and older and tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. She saw me before I saw her. She stood very still by the chip wall and just said softly, Nathan. I nodded at her. I didn't hate her. I hadn't hated her in a long time. I just didn't have anything to say. Then Claire came around the corner with Rose on her hip, and Rose saw me and shouted, Daddy! The way a 3-year-old does, like I was the only person in the world, and Claire smiled at me and Vanessa watched all of it. I saw her eyes fill up. She nodded at me once, like a person acknowledging a verdict, and she turned around and walked the other way down the aisle. I didn't watch her go. That night, after Rose was asleep and Lucas was reading in his room and Claire was curled against my shoulder on the couch, I looked around the living room of our little cabin, at the fire in the stone hearth, at the dog snoring at our feet, at the photographs of my son and my stepson and my daughter lined up on the mantel, and I thought about the man I had been standing in that foyer in the rain, listening to his wife negotiate his destruction with strangers. I thought about how sure he had been in that moment that nothing would ever be good again. I wish I could have told him what I know now. I wish I could have leaned in and said, Brother, the worst day of your life is about to become the first day of the rest of it. You don't know it yet, but there's a woman 20 miles up a mountain road who is going to look at your broken dog and scratch his ears and tell him he's handsome, and from there, everything is going to be all right. You just have to walk through this door. Record what you hear. Say what you came to say. And then you have to be brave enough, just one more time, to start over. I pulled Claire a little closer on the couch. She made a small, sleepy sound and settled her head under my chin. Outside, the elk were coming down to the creek in the last blue light, the way they always do. And I sat there, a man who had lost everything and then, somehow, been given back more than he ever had in the first place. And I listened to my wife breathe. And I thought, for maybe the first time in my life, I understand now what I was supposed to learn.